Hello and welcome to the Gym Lords Podcast. My name is Cale Owen, the general manager here at Gym Launch, and I'm excited to introduce you to a four-part series that Alex Hormozi, our CEO here at Gym Launch, did with Dr. John Berardi, the founder of Precision Nutrition. And they dive into a ton of different topics that I know you're going to find extremely interesting. But before we hop in, as always, go ahead and hit a like button if you find some value in this. And then also, if you want to learn more and get more content very similar to this, go ahead and subscribe to our channel. We're going to be posting a ton of content just like this, and you can get notified when we do. And if you have any comments or anything, make sure to drop them below. And let's go ahead and let's go right into the video.
So for everyone who's listening from the gym space right now, I'm going to put on my selfish hat, which hopefully will serve you as well. But I wanted to transition into a couple of questions that I had for JB about sort of my situation, where we're at right now. And for those of you who don't know, right now, my wife and I have 6 companies that we own in our portfolio. And John did the much cooler thing, which is build one company to a $1 zillion valuation. And we've done a slightly different approach and kind of repeating the same frameworks on lots of different industries now. We're known on this podcast for the gym space, but we're only 1/6 of the stuff that we do. And so I had some higher level, even bigger questions for everyone on here to sink their teeth into. And the first one was, when we spoke a while back, you talked about how the vast majority of the information that's out there is produced by people who are inside of the matrix. And I think, and I'm just trying to summarize for everyone, what you meant by that is that most people are operating from a place of lack or place of desire, where they want something that they do not have. And so all of the information and all the stuff that they're producing is coming from the place of wanting to fulfill that need, rather than a place of contentment or satisfaction. Right now in your life, you've created, all the stability that you need financially. How do you create and destroy meaning?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's something that I'm personally in a very weird place. Because I don't think we're going to sell any of to my knowledge, I don't think we're going to sell, unless someone's listening and would like to just offer me a big bag of money, I'm open. But we don't foresee us selling any of the major companies that we own. And we're at a place where we don't need anything, and the money just continues to pour in. And I'm curious how that transition was for yours. Was probably really acute, you know what I mean? And I feel like mine's been a little bit more gradual.
Yeah.
But I'm curious how you've navigated that, because it's been something that probably occupies about 50% of my active day.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I want to start with the matrix idea. I really like your summary, and it's that's one of my definitions of it. The other is simply this idea that we, when we sold PN, it was a large transaction, and of all the people listening, maybe no one is in this situation yet, so I apologize if it's not particularly relevant. But I grew up in an immigrant family, pretty poor, and so I don't come from the leisure class. We learned early, you got to work hard, or you got to make money to live. And this very idea of working for money, because money is the way to have shelter and food and vacations and either the basic level human needs things or slightly nicer things. And when we sold PN, I never had to work for money again, and the shift was really profound. I've seen lots of people have big financial transactions and never make that shift.
Yes, this is why I'm asking. Yes.
Yeah, a host of reasons. Not all bad. Some people are just called by their purpose and passion, and all the tools that they've ever built around earning money for things serve them, right? If you have a bigger goal, those bigger goals often require more money, and you may not have enough money to self-finance it, right? Like Elon Musk is the poster boy for wealth now and accomplishment and all that kind of stuff, but his personal wealth is not so liquid that he could just start another $1 billion company, right? No matter how wealthy you think he is, like most of it is tied up in the money that is in his companies, the valuation of his companies. So not even Elon Musk has enough money, right? Unless he went and sold everything and liquidated everything.
Right.
to do some of the major projects that he's embarking on. So he needs to play that same profit game, do
Yeah.
things that earn money off of expensive money. And so this is what I call the matrix. The matrix is this, you know, algorithm or program that you're living in where you have to work. So the hours of your life must be spent, at least some of them, in the pursuit of making money, either for your own needs to be met or big visions and goals to become reality. Well, when we sold PN, I realized, you know, I'd done something that I thought was really valuable and meaningful within the context of my own life. I never had to work for money again. I have a young family. I want to be with them while they're still young and with us. There's this concept when you have kids about 18 summers, right? You get 18 summers with them and then that's it. And 95% of the time that you'll spend with your children is during those 18 summers, right? So
Uh,
after they're 18, statistically only 5% of the time you'll spend with your children will be after that,
wow.
which is remarkable data.
That is
And
remarkable.
so, at least for a while, what if I tried to operate outside the matrix? What if I tried to operate in a way where none of the decisions that I was making were motivated by the need to earn money, right? Again, very few people are in this life
Yeah.
circumstance. Sometimes not even the wealthiest people you've heard of because their money isn't liquid. Um, and what would that change about my decision making, right? And I want to be intentional about it because I have so many reps at doing things to make money. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like that's how you build a precision nutrition, right? And so your instincts are always, okay, cool. I'm going to write this book. It's going to cost X amount of dollars to promote and distribute and design. How will we turn a profit on that? How will I spend my investment dollars? And this is not just a theoretical example. The first thing I did after I sold PN was write this book, Changemaker. And I hired one of the best designers in the world. It was a ridiculous amount of money. I will never see a return.
Yeah.
I will never sell enough copies of that book to even pay the designer. You know what I mean? But the question was, what's the point of this book? Is it a profit center for me? No, I captured everything I think I learned in the field. I wanted everyone to read it. So now I send 500 copies to a conference that I'm not even attending. So the promoter can give them out for free to everyone who's there. I run ads to promote the book that I will never see a return on that investment. Simply so more people can get that book and read it because I think it's that valuable. Now I was able to pay the designer back, thankfully. Enough people did buy it. But nevertheless, the out of the matrix decision making can be as tactile as how much money you're making on projects, or whether you're doing them for money or not, or whether you're willing to take money completely off the table, um, or it can be all the other things we talked about: meaning, value, contribution, all of that, right? It all is wrapped up in this package, because in the matrix, like almost every book anyone's ever read was been written by someone in the matrix. When people talk about how to derive meaning from your work, it all assumes you have to work, right? That's the presumption there. It's all written from inside the matrix. We are trying to squeeze meaning out of an activity we're forced to do because we have no other choice, right? For me, the question was, is any of that relevant outside of that space? Like you asked about meaning.
Yeah.
Can you create value and meaning outside of work? The question is just simply, why did we ever think it had to be tied to work in the first place? And the answer is because everyone had to work.
Right.
Everyone you knew, everyone who taught you, everywhere you learned, everyone who wrote books, everyone you've interacted with has had to work. So they were trying to find meaning in work because they had to work. The question becomes, when you don't have to work, why would you continue to associate meaning with work? Why couldn't we find it in any other place? Why couldn't we find it in long walks in the afternoon with our partner? Why couldn't we find it in quietly reading in a rocking chair on our back porch? Why couldn't we find it in time with loved ones? Why couldn't we find it in volunteering at an animal shelter? why does it have to be so intimately attached to work, and why are we so tied to the meaning, or tied to the belief that work and meaning go hand in hand, and that money has to be required to contribute meaning? And I get it. I totally get it. I'm in this very privileged, rare position to think these thoughts and to start to unpack them. And sometimes I really question whether I should talk about this in public, honestly, because I don't want to deconstruct anyone else's
Yeah,
relationships to
I
work and
understand.
meaning. If you're still in the matrix, I don't want to break this connection for you if it's working. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I read a lot of philosophy, and there's this famous historian and philosopher Will Durant, who's written some of the most influential works of 1900s and 2000s. And he talks about this idea that how we orient to the world, how we feel in our orientation to the world, is less governed by the reality. It is about our perception of reality.
100%. Yeah.
So truth may exist independent of our perception, but it's irrelevant to our experience as humans. You know what I mean? Our perception is the only thing that governs our experience, right?
Yeah.
So that's why I worry a little bit about talking about this sometimes. But I also have met people, and this is where I'm like, hey, you don't need to be a super rich person to start to unpack these ideas, who aren't super rich and have figured out ways to play a good percentage of their time outside the matrix. Some of my friends, and I really look up to them in particular ways, because I see how they just got a regular job, they make enough money, and then everything they do outside of that is independent of their work. You know what I mean? Their meaning comes from the things that they do outside of there. And I remember in a philosophy course that Phil, my business partner and long-term friend, was taking. He was a systems design. He was a triple major: systems design, engineering, philosophy, and Italian. Those were his majors. And
He's a weirdo, like Dave.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. And he came home one day. We used to live together, and he was like, one of my philosophy professors said something really interesting today. We were asking like what the best job for a philosopher was, and he said mailman. Right? And the notion being, like, back then in like smaller communities, you just got your mail bag and you walk around and drop off the mail, on foot. You
Yeah.
get all this time to walk and
Yeah.
think, that's the best profession for a philosopher. And it just, it made me think there's an interesting path to being outside the matrix, even if you still have to work for money, right? So to your question, okay, so that's my unpacking of the matrix idea.
Oh, I think it's wonderful. Thank you.
To your question about meaning, right? It's really interesting. I mean, I've thought about this a lot too. And I keep landing at a place where I want to let go of the need even for meaning, right?
Okay.
This idea that I have to find a higher purpose or my life will have been wasted.
Mm-hmm.
This may be a dark thought to some people, but I think it's freeing for others. Like Camus, famous philosopher, said the meaning of life is the thing that prevents you from killing yourself. That's it. It's all there is, right? If you haven't killed yourself yet, then whatever's stopping you from doing that is the meaning of life, right? It's that simple. So do we need grand gestures of meaning? Do we need to be attached to higher purposes? Maybe, and maybe in seasons of your life, but maybe not all. It's a unique, probably Alex thing and JB thing, because we're whatever, aggressive and want to be accomplished and want to have achievements, or that orientation, that we want to hack meaning. You know
Right.
what I mean? That we want to
100%.
figure out the answers, right? Like I'm gonna intellectually and philosophically submission grapple life onto my terms, right? The question just becomes, is there nooks and crannies of your life where you can let some of that shit go, some of that achievement orientation, and just say, uh, meaning could be as simple as, and here's where we start to like devolve into cliches,
Mhm.
but during times where I don't have to be achievement oriented, not being achievement oriented, and being as present with loved ones, with self, with the natural world as I can. Can I, if I have a pet, can I take them for an hour walk without thinking about work or tomorrow or expectations or whatever, about any achievement or any personal growth? I have a
Yeah.
podcast now, and my upcoming podcast is about personal development and growth. And I'm looking at it critically. Like, we'll talk about some of the benefits, but I've long had a mixed relationship with the idea that we all ought to be constantly working on personal growth. And I
Yeah.
talked with a guy named Bruce Tift, who's a psychologist who has been practicing psychotherapist and Buddhist for 50 years. And Bruce talked about personal growth and development is wonderful if it doesn't have an obsessive quality to it, where
Right.
it's not compulsion, right? The Buddhists talk a lot about this. Freedom in life
Mm-hmm.
is a freedom from compulsion. And he has some really interesting thoughts on why we have compulsion in the first place, tying back to our youth and maybe certain aspects of ourselves feeling unworkable in the environment, family environment, even if we had a wonderful family environment. And personal growth and development being this itch
Yeah.
that it's just inherent, because when you were younger there were certain things that didn't fit in with your school or your community or your parents, and so you continue to try and make life okay, right? So anyway, how to find meaning outside the matrix, maybe not work so hard to find meaning, uh, and maybe find it in not achievement or grand gestures or big philosophical designs, but in freedom from obsession and compulsion.
I knew I was going to love the answer. And in classic JB style, the answer is the question.
Right.
Ryan, why do you need to find meaning? You already aren't killing yourself, so you're fine.
That's right.
So Dr. Kashi and I, who those who listen may know, he's probably my
Yes.
closest friend, and we talk about this stuff. Like, this is probably the vast majority of the things that we talk about. Is just all things surrounding meaning and joy, and whatever ways you want to define. Finding making life more enjoyable.
Hmm.
And those are not necessarily the same thing.
Yeah.
But it's funny because our next big venture that we have, which is acquisition.com, that was kind of what it started with. Was I had a very thoughtful performance coach who said, she was like, what do you like doing?
Yeah.
I was like, I like writing and I like drawing pictures of business ideas. I was like, that is
Hmm.
what I like doing the most. And she was like, what if you just made a business where that was all you did and you don't need the money? So just what if you just did that? And I was like,
Hmm.
well, I wonder what that would look like. You know what I mean? And so that's
Yeah.
kind of what birthed acquisition.com and the first book that came out, which is the first in a 10-volume series of just everything, kind of like what you said, you crystallized the information.
Yeah.
I felt like I lacked that playbook, and I'm partially making it for my own companies that we're that we're
Right.
investing in. And so it's all exposed. There's also a backdoor training that it's just like,
Right.
the book's 99 cents. It comes with the course, all the downloads, everything. It's 99 cents. It's just like, just everyone have it. And it's been really meaningful for me, but maybe I should just stop trying to find meaning in things, because I think for me, I just created, we just did our will
Hmm.
a week ago. It was all the estate planning stuff.
Yeah. Yes.
And
The reality of mortality sets in.
yes, and the realization that so we don't have children. I'm not sure if we will have children. And the realization that all of the stuff that we've accumulated up to this point anyways, I'm going to just give away.
Yeah.
And I was like, this doesn't even serve me that much. Like, the marginal utility of more money is very low. You know what I mean? And that's what, that was like, just even that sentence took me some time to figure out to say. It's like, money has very low marginal utility after a certain point.
Yeah. Well, I think though, I'll tell you what was really helpful for me. I sat down with the financial planner. This is prior to selling PN, but we've continued working together since. And I wanted to know, like, how I guess the fundamental question is, are we okay financially?
Yeah.
Right. That's really the question. But you have to operationalize that somehow, right?
Right.
And it's just like, how long will the money we have last?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So they made me these predictions. They're like, if you spend $100,000 a year, your money will last blah. And
Forever.
when you die at 98, you will have X in the bank, you know? And you're like, oh shit, okay, $100,000 a year then is too little to spend. Okay, so how much, you know? And so they plot this out for you. And that for me, again, someone who likes data and all that, made it super clear like what okay meant financially for me, you know, and the lifestyle that we lead and all that kind of stuff, you know. And I thought that made real the statement that you made, you know, the marginal utility of extra money is whatever, right? Because
Yeah.
you're like, oh shit, okay. I mean, you know, and I'll share our number, not to be boastful, just so people,
Yeah.
you know, like if I spend $2 million a year every year, I'll still die with 98 with money to give to our kids and all that other kind of stuff, right? So that makes it real. Like I could I possibly spend that on food and
Yeah.
houses and cars? I guess if I tried really
Really.
hard. But so now that frees you up to do quote unquote professional things. Like I can start a business. That's goal is to help as many people as possible while losing $1 million a year.
Yes.
And I could do that for the next 45 years and still spend $1 million on food and cars. And
And make
see,
no money from this business, mind you, which is,
that's
you
what,
know,
yeah,
which would
that's
be
right.
hard. It would be hard. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So it's again, that's the kind of out of the matrix thinking that eventually happens. And then you can start to think about things like happiness and joy and what maps, you know, I mean, certainly a certain amount. This often quoted study about, you know, people who make over $70,000 a year aren't any happier than uh, I don't think that's true. Um, I spoke with a happiness researcher for the podcast recently, and the idea of how you measure happiness is different than what people think, right? So
Okay. Because
so
I've
so the
I've
I
cited that study too, and I mean, candidly, my life is significantly better now than it was when I was making $70,000 a year. Just,
totally.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, right? In other ways, I mean, and the measure of happiness, there's multiple dimensions to it that
Mhm.
are assessed, and some happiness is measured like an emotion, and others it's measured like a reflective take on the overall arc and quality of your life, right? So if someone were to ask, "Yeah, Alex, are you happy?" and they're asking in the emotional sense, it'd be the same as asking Alex, are you annoyed? You know what I mean? Alex,
Yeah.
are you grumpy? You know, it's a
Totally.
transient feeling, right? But the
Yeah.
other sense of happiness is this notion of when I look back on my life, do I feel content and satisfied with the things that I've done and the people I've met and
Yeah.
all that? So when you ask people who have made 80,000 versus 60,000 versus a million, are you happy? You have to be really sure you operationalize which one. Are we talking about your momentary
Mm.
mood, you know, today?
Mm.
Because honestly, if I just ate ice cream and I was making 20 grand a year, I would report happiness. You know what I mean? Same as the $1 million person, right?
Yeah.
As a transitory mood, it's easy to engineer happiness. Just send
Right.
me down a roller coaster if I'm not afraid of heights, you know,
Yeah.
and we'll both equal happiness. But that other measure of a trajectory of a life and of things accomplished and all that could be quite different, right? So anyway, again, me, you, and Trevor would probably have some good chats about this stuff. But
And that's interesting a lot too, because the over, so I've changed my language from happiness to joy because I feel like
yeah,
that's a little bit less transient.
yeah,
But what's interesting about what you said is like even the looking back on your life piece, right? Um, I'll say there's a friend that I grew up with, or not grew up in my early business career with, and he was much older than I was, and I think that he's one of the most content people looking back on his life because he was an adopted kid from the wrong side of the tracks, and he started 3 small businesses. They're all brick and mortar, and I think they made him $20,000 or $30,000 a month in profit. And he didn't work for 25 years. And he had no aspirations for doing more. He went to the lake every weekend with his family, and he played an 18 holes of golf every morning, 5 days a week for 25 years.
Yeah.
And when he looks back on his life, and I've talked to him about it, he's like, I slayed the dragon of life.
Yeah.
And to me, that would not be a life well lived.
Right.
And so I think it's interesting because because the expectation that we put on ourselves, which is completely arbitrary, also influences how we perceive joy or contentment over like I could say, well, I didn't cure cancer. I'm a failure.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And so anyway, not to but like
no,
this.
No, I love that. I love that story. It's really important because it ties back to how we started the whole conversation, right? When you know your values and priorities and purpose and unique abilities, then it also helps you to stop when it's time to stop, right? He stopped, right? He's like, with that 30 grand in profit a month, you would have started another business for sure. You know what I mean? He was like, that I did. I'm going to the lake. You know what I mean? And they're two totally different things. Now, whether his was right or yours was right is completely irrelevant. It depends on what soil you plant the seed in, right? It's different soil completely. And I find it really interesting. A quote that popped to my head was another from that conversation with Bruce Tift, where we were talking about anxiety. And he said, people want to ascribe anxiety to an external set of conditions, like a person or a thing or work or whatever. Anxiety is part of being human. You have anxiety because you're an organic being. And that's what anxiety is. It comes from being an organic being, right? And so he probably has anxiety at times, just like you do. And you might ascribe yours to work, and he might ascribe his to, well, I do play a lot of golf, but I haven't whatever's, right? So it's really important to think through what these feelings mean and how then our thinky frontal cortex starts to tell stories about that. And that's why, talking about that meaning thing we talked about earlier, it's so important to ask these questions, like, is trying to figure out meaning simply my frontal cortex working overtime, doing some stuff it ought not to be doing, right?
Just because it's bored.
Yeah.
Because I've already satisfied shelter, food, and whatever for the rest of my life. I'm
an organic being, and that's why I really love some aspects of what people teach in meditation. I mean, nowadays people try and, do studies looking at brain and body and how does meditation help on particular endpoints. But one of the most profound things is just that understanding that anxiety, so emotions, thoughts, what's meaning, what's purpose, can pass like clouds through your brain. Like, you don't know how they originate. They just sometimes you're thinking about it. How did that even happen? It just spontaneously burst into my awareness. But if you don't do anything with it, it can just pass like a cloud, and then it's out of your awareness. And then you're like, lunch. You know what I mean? that came up next, and wow, I didn't have to solve the anxiety problem or the meaning problem. Do you practice Buddhism or any kind of meditative stuff? I have spent a lot of time in meditation in my younger years. Nowadays, I probably don't have a regular formal meditation practice, although during times when, let's say, emotions like anxiety or things like that might be visiting more frequently, spontaneously entering my consciousness, I will take a little bit of time out for just quiet breathing and mindfulness, either mindfulness style meditation or transcendental type. The way that I really demystify them is the one type that I'll do is what we at PN used to call a mind body scan, where you just go in a room, shut off all the lights, pull the blinds, lay on the floor, and you just breathe deeply through your nose while you check in with your toes and your feet and your ankles and your shins, and you just do like a mind body scan. That's like what I would consider sort of this mindfulness awareness practice. And the other one is just breathing while letting thoughts flow through. And as the practice increases, you just find that thoughts are either leaving super quickly or just spontaneously not coming as much as they would. And those two things have always felt really good to me. I mean, I started doing this in the 90s.
Before it was cool.
Yeah, yeah. When I remember reading a book on sports psychology, that's what I was bodybuilding at the time, and so I was reading all this stuff, and they taught these things, which are now have, you know, they westernized the Eastern origins of them, and now the Eastern origins are actually creeping into our lexicon.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, I mean, I listen to Sam Harris a lot, and it's really interesting because he's so uh, much of an advocate and proponent of meditation. But it's really clear when people ask him about it, he doesn't have like a regular practice either. He's not like, I go in
Mm,
this room and I sit on the mat and I carve out 15 minutes. And
yeah.
it's clear he doesn't do that anymore because it's just a thing you might spring up during certain times. But the point of the practice was to identify that thoughts and feelings arise spontaneously. They're not a conscious choice. They enter your conscious mind, and they can leave your conscious mind just as readily if you let them go, rather than going, oh, that's a thing, it's really important, I should worry about that, and clutch onto it. Now I got to
Yeah.
solve it and bring it into my life.
Pretty incredible stuff, right? So on the next video, the last video in the 4-part series, Dr. John Berardi and Alex Hormozi will be walking through the last and final questions that they're going to be going over. So we hope you enjoyed this so far. As always, go ahead and like, drop a comment, and subscribe to our channel, and we'll see you on the next video.